So according to the latest breathless barrage of royal headlines, King Charles has officially been forced to slam his fist on his heavy mahogany desk and physically intervene in a toxic, rapidly escalating Cold War between his wife, Queen Camilla, and his daughter-in-law, Kate Middleton. We are being sold a highly cinematic story of a desperately jealous queen consort, a flawlessly maneuvering Princess of Wales, and an aging king trapped in the crossfire of his own palace. But honestly, the most fascinating part of this supposed showdown isn't the alleged backstabbing. It's the sheer, mechanical desperation behind why this specific narrative is being pushed right now, and exactly how the British tabloid machinery relies on the public, completely ignoring how this institution actually functions behind closed doors. If you take a step back, put the glossy magazines down, and actually look at the structural reality of the monarchy over the last 20 years, the absolute absurdity of this jealousy plotline doesn't just unravel, it completely detonates. But before we get into the deeply uncomfortable psychological realities of the king's marriage, and why the global media fundamentally requires these two women to hate each other, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the actual truth behind the royal PR machine. Right now, the narrative we are being aggressively spoon-fed is incredibly specific. The story claims that Camilla is deeply, viscerally threatened by Kate's astronomical popularity. It claims that Charles is suddenly drowning in secret, late-night regrets about Princess Diana, and that he is deliberately elevating Kate to spite his own wife. But when you zoom out and look at the actual documented timeline of these four human beings, this entire storyline requires you to possess the memory of a goldfish. Let's dismantle the very first, most glaring contradiction, this completely fabricated idea that Kate's global popularity has only just now mutated into an existential threat to Camilla. The media is desperate to frame this as a recent development, claiming that ever since Kate inherited the title of Princess of Wales after the late Queen's death, she has ascended to this terrifying, untouchable new level of public worship that is actively driving Camilla insane with envy. Here is exactly where that logic hits a brick wall. Kate Middleton has been the undisputed, universally adored crown jewel of the royal family for an entire decade. This is not breaking news. The polling data hasn't experienced some sudden mysterious tectonic shift. Kate's approval ratings have been astronomically, consistently high since at least 2015, and they became completely untouchable around 2017 when she began launching her solo legacy projects. So the fundamental premise that Camilla just woke up one random Tuesday morning in 2024, looked at a newspaper and suddenly realized that her beautiful, much younger daughter-in-law is popular, completely defies basic human logic. If there was genuinely going to be a devastating, earth-shattering jealousy crisis between these two women, it would have detonated 15 years ago. It would have happened when Kate's royal wedding completely eclipsed Charles and Camilla's entire public rehabilitation tour. It would absolutely not be happening right now. Why? Because right now Camilla is standing at the absolute apex of her entire life's ambition. She has finally achieved the one monumental thing she spent 30 brutal years waiting in the shadows for. She is the queen. She has the ancient title. She had the global televised coronation. She has the ultimate legally binding public acknowledgement from the British state. She survived being the most hated woman in the United Kingdom. And she won. That is not the psychological profile of a 77-year-old woman who is suddenly going to spiral into petty, unhinged insecurity because her daughter-in-law wore a nice dress to a garden party. Camilla has survived the absolute worst the global press could throw at a human being. The idea that she is now throwing tantrums behind closed doors over Kate's Instagram likes is fundamentally insulting to the intelligence of anyone who has actually watched Camilla operate. Furthermore, can we please take a long, hard look at how this entire feud narrative completely erases the fact that Camilla and Kate have been firmly entrenched in each other's daily lives for 2 decades. Kate officially married William in 2011. Camilla legally married Charles in 2005. They were in each other's orbits long before that. That is 20 years of shared family holidays at Balmoral. 20 years of incredibly tense Christmas walks at Sandringham. 20 years of navigating the exact same bizarre, suffocating, treacherous royal fishbowl. If there was some toxic, deep-seated resentment actively brewing between these two highly disciplined women, we would have seen actual, tangible evidence of it years ago. We would have seen massive staffing leaks, deliberate protocol snubs, or overlapping charity events designed to steal focus. Instead, what does the media offer as proof of this war? Amateur body language analysis. We get supposed experts claiming that because Kate looks slightly away from Camilla during a 2-hour carriage ride, it is a covert declaration of total war. The reports currently circulating love to claim that Kate is noticeably icy around Camilla and severely lacks warmth when they are forced to interact. Let's actually examine that. Kate is icy around almost everyone in public. That is quite literally her defining professional superpower. She is intensely poised. She is flawlessly polished. She does not do large, messy, emotional displays at official state engagements. That isn't a sign of boiling, behind-the-scenes tension. That is simply how she operates as a representative of the crown. She acted the exact same way when standing next to Queen Elizabeth II, and nobody was frantically writing fan fiction about a secret blood feud there. What is actually happening here, if you strip away all of the breathless tabloid adjectives and the soap opera framing, is that the British monarchy is currently grinding through a very natural, entirely predictable, and somewhat painful transition of power. And certain media outlets are completely desperate to monetize that transition by turning it into a catfight. Look at the harsh reality of the demographics. King Charles is in his mid-70s and battling serious health issues. William and Kate are in their early 40s. The entire institution is deliberately, systematically shifting its weight toward the younger generation because that is literally the only way a hereditary monarchy survives the 21st century. Camilla knows this. She is incredibly shrewd. She spent decades successfully navigating one of the most hostile public relations environments in modern history. She understands the mechanics of the long game better than almost anyone else walking the halls of Buckingham Palace. The idea that she is suddenly panicking and demanding Charles intervene to stop Kate's rise feels like it was written by someone who fundamentally does not understand that Camilla's entire survival strategy has always been built on silent, relentless patience. But let's pivot and talk about the Princess Diana element of this story, because this is where the tabloid narrative really tips its hand and shows you exactly what it's trying to manipulate. The secondary storyline being heavily pushed right now is that King Charles is privately, agonizingly regretting how he treated Princess Diana in the 1980s, that he supposedly sees all of Diana's most radiant, beloved qualities reflected in Kate, and that this realization is somehow making him question his entire marriage to Camilla. I need you to really critically think about whether that psychological profile makes even a fraction of sense for a man who is now deeply settled into his late 70s. This is a man who has been married to Camilla for almost 20 years. This is a man who willingly fought through decades of absolute vitriolic public backlash, who risked his own path to the throne, who defied his mother, the church, and the government, all just to be with her. That is not the profile of a man who is currently sitting around in his private study, staring into the fireplace, wondering if he made the wrong romantic choice. Charles is notoriously stubborn. He made his choice incredibly clearly, incredibly publicly, and has stuck with it through literally every single crisis thrown at them. The idea that Charles is now having secret, tortured moments of solitude where he whispers to himself about Diana feels significantly less like leaked insider information from a palace source, and much, much more like pure projection from a segment of the public who simply refuses to forgive him for the divorce. The Diana comparisons applied to Kate are also deeply worth examining here, because they are doing a massive amount of heavy lifting to keep this supposed feud alive. Yes, both women are undeniably stylish. Yes, they are both very warm in public settings. And yes, they both have a profound natural ease with children. But the media has been violently forcing these exact same Diana parallels onto Kate since her engagement to William was officially announced in 2010. This is not some brand new startling observation that is suddenly making Charles uncomfortable at the Sunday dinner table. He has been actively watching the global press compare his daughter-in-law to his late ex-wife for 14 straight years. If that dynamic was going to trigger some sort of massive emotional crisis or spark a jealousy war within his second marriage, it would have happened a very, very long time ago. The far more likely, incredibly mundane truth is that Charles has made peace with Diana's complicated legacy as much as any human being possibly can, and that he actually just sees Kate as an incredibly effective, reliable colleague rather than some haunting, ghostly reminder of his past mistakes. What I find genuinely fascinating, though, is how this current media narrative attempts to weaponize Camilla's daily schedule. The reports ominously suggest that Camilla might aggressively increase her public appearances, explicitly align herself with highly significant charitable causes, or deliberately deepen her public displays of unity with Charles to secure her position against Kate. But if you actually understand how the firm operates, those actions aren't a secret Machiavellian strategy. That is literally just her job description. That is what being queen consort entails. She is supposed to do those exact things regardless of whether she feels threatened by Kate Middleton or not. Framing completely normal, scheduled royal duties as a desperate, frantic attempt to stay relevant is a classic tabloid maneuver. Take something incredibly boring that would be happening anyway, like attending a literacy charity event or cutting a ribbon at a hospital ward, and injects it with a sinister competitive motivation just to make it seem dramatic. Camilla has been the active patron or president of over 90 different charities for years. She has been doing grueling, emotionally heavy domestic abuse advocacy work since long before she was ever handed the title of queen. If she continues doing that exact same work now, it is not because she is sitting in Clarence's house panicking about Kate's media coverage. It is because that is literally her assigned role within the state apparatus. The reports also claim that King Charles is carefully orchestrating joint appearances to force both women to look united, and that he is deliberately handing Kate more prominent, high-stakes engagements to explicitly solidify her as a future queen, allegedly to Camilla's absolute dismay. Again, this is not a soap opera plot twist. This is just basic, required succession planning. William and Kate taking on significantly more responsibility and higher-profile state duties is not a calculated offensive move against Camilla. It is the entire fundamental point of having a hereditary monarchy. Charles is 75 years old. He is actively receiving cancer treatments. He is not going to be flying around the globe doing this forever. The deliberate structural shift toward the younger, more energetic generation was always going to happen, and everyone inside the palace knew it was going to rapidly accelerate immediately after the late Queen's death. Camilla watched the exact same generational shift happen with the Queen Mother, with Princess Margaret, and with all the other senior royals who gradually, gracefully stepped back into secondary roles as the next generation came up to take the spotlight. However, the part of these reports that actually made me pause, the one single element that contains a tiny grain of potential truth, was the suggestion that Camilla's relationship with Prince William might be strained. That specific dynamic has been rumored for years, and realistically there might actually be something there. But it's not necessarily about petty jealousy or Kate's outfits. It's about the incredibly deep, historically complicated dynamics of a heavily scrutinized blended family, where the children's biological mother died in a deeply traumatic, highly public way that was inextricably tied to their father's long-term relationship with their new stepmother. William was only 15 years old when Diana died in Paris. He had to spend his most formative, vulnerable years watching his father's mistress slowly, methodically get rebranded by palace PR teams as his father's partner, then his father's wife, then his stepmother, then the Duchess of Cornwall, and finally the Queen. That is an absolute mountain of complicated emotional processing for any human being to handle, let alone a future king operating under the world's microscope, and William, unlike his brother Harry, has always been fiercely private about his actual internal feelings. So if there is some inherent coolness, some professional distance, or lingering tension between William and Camilla, that would make absolute sense on a basic human level. You don't need to invent a convoluted jealousy plot involving Kate to explain why William and Camilla might not be best friends. But here is the crucial missing link in the tabloid logic. Even if there is some residual tension between William and Camilla, that absolutely does not automatically mean there is a war between Kate and Camilla. Kate's relationship with Camilla is heavily mediated through William's relationship with Camilla, which is mediated through Charles's relationship with both of them, which is entirely mediated through decades of incredibly heavy, highly publicized family trauma. Trying to lazily isolate all of that complex history down to a headline that reads, "Camilla is jealous of Kate's popularity," is such a reductive, insulting way to look at a family dynamic that has more layers than a wedding cake. The polling data that these articles constantly cite to prove Camilla's insecurity is also deeply worth examining, because it actually proves the exact opposite of what the tabloids claim. Yes, Kate's approval ratings are sky high. They have been for a long time. But Camilla's approval ratings have actually improved significantly and steadily since she became queen consort. When she first married Charles back in 2005, she was facing approval ratings in the abysmal low 30s. The public was deeply hostile, but by the time the coronation rolled around in 2023, she was solidly polling in the high 40s to low 50s. Depending on which agency you look at, that number is obviously still lower than Kate's, but the trajectory is entirely upward, not downward. If anything, officially becoming queen and proving her work ethic has massively helped her public image, not hurt it. So the core premise that she is sitting around watching Kate's popularity with growing paranoid resentment simply doesn't match the actual data. Her own numbers are improving. She is winning the exact long game she set out to play. What I genuinely believe is actually happening behind those palace walls is entirely simpler, far more bureaucratic, and significantly less dramatic. The monarchy is currently in a highly sensitive transition period. Charles's reign is widely expected by everyone, including Charles himself, to be significantly shorter than his mother's was, simply due to the mathematics of his age and health. William and Kate are the undeniable future of the institution, and absolutely everyone involved knows it, especially Camilla. But the global media machine requires a constant, daily stream of content to fill the vast, empty gaps between major royal weddings, tours, and scandals. Especially now that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are largely isolated in California. The British press has lost their primary source of daily conflict. And unfortunately, two professional women who work together daily and share a cordial, entirely functional but not especially warm relationship does not sell magazines, doesn't generate clicks, it doesn't keep people glued to their screens. We get this recycled narrative instead. We get the trope of the jealous aging older woman desperately clinging to power. We get the effortlessly beloved flawless younger woman. We get the weak conflicted man caught in the middle of them. And we get the tragic lingering ghost of the first wife haunting everyone's every move. It is a deeply compelling story structure. It has heroes, villains, and high stakes. It just also happens to be entirely untrue. The Diana regret angle is arguably the most emotionally manipulative part of all of this because it directly taps into something that millions of people around the world still deeply, viscerally feel: the idea that Diana was profoundly wronged, that she deserved a much better ending, and that Charles simply must, on some cosmic level, secretly know he made a catastrophic mistake. And on a human level, maybe Charles does have some quiet regrets about how terribly certain things played out in the 90s. Most divorced people do. But there is a massive fundamental difference between wishing you had handled a painful situation with more grace and actively wishing you had chosen an entirely different person to spend your life with. The hard, undeniable evidence of King Charles's actual documented behavior over the past 3 decades suggests that he chose exactly who he wanted to be with. He waited years to legally marry Camilla. He weathered scandal after horrific scandal for her. He funded massive PR campaigns for her. He explicitly made her queen despite knowing it would cause intense public controversy. Those are simply not the actions of a man who secretly wishes he had stayed with his first wife. The tabloid stories also continually claim that Charles is having these private moments of solitude where he intensely reflects on these romantic regrets. This is framed as if a 75-year-old reigning king has a massive amount of unscheduled, empty alone time to just stare out of rain-streaked windows and ponder his romantic past. Charles's daily schedule is notoriously, punishingly packed. He is running a global monarchy. He is managing a highly fractured family. He is actively dealing with serious health treatments. He is reading red boxes of government dispatch papers every single night, and he is desperately trying to modernize an ancient, creaking institution while keeping it financially stable. The idea that he is actively carving out time in his day to have sweeping, cinematic, emotional reckonings about a marriage that ended in the 1990s feels like it was written by someone who has watched entirely too many fictional period dramas. What is actually deeply revealing about this whole Camilla versus Kate narrative isn't what it says about Camilla, or Kate, or even Charles. It is what it says about us. It reveals exactly how we, as a global audience, still process Princess Diana's death nearly 3 decades later. Diana remains the absolute emotional center of gravity for so much royal coverage because she was genuinely beloved in a way that entirely transcended the stiff institution she married into. People heavily projected their own lives onto her. They saw themselves in her highly publicized struggles. They mourned her tragic death as if they had lost a close personal friend. And because that collective grief never fully, cleanly resolved itself, there is this persistent, almost desperate cultural desire to see her vindicated somehow. The public wants to see Charles finally, brokenly admit he was wrong. They want to see Camilla finally face some sort of karmic consequence for the affair. And they desperately want to see Diana's legacy ultimately triumph through Kate. This specific feud story delivers all of that psychological wish fulfillment in one neat, highly readable package. Charles is regretful, Camilla is insecure and punished. Kate is Diana's true triumphant heir. Clean emotional resolution they've been waiting 30 years for, but real life simply does not work like that. Real families, especially royal ones, are significantly messier, more bureaucratic, and far more boring. Charles probably doesn't spend his evenings obsessing over Diana. Camilla probably isn't losing a single second of sleep over Kate's polling numbers. Kate probably isn't trying to orchestrate a Machiavellian plot to outmaneuver anyone. They are all just wealthy adults doing their highly specific jobs, which happen to be some of the most heavily scrutinized, bizarre jobs in the world. While the media actively constructs these elaborate Shakespearean narratives around them that have very little to do with their actual day-to-day reality, the part of these reports that almost made me laugh out loud was the solemn suggestion that King Charles might soon be forced to make a definitive choice between supporting Camilla or supporting Kate. It is framed as if this is a bitter custody battle in a family court, and not a highly structured constitutional firm of adults who all intimately understand exactly how the institution works. Charles is not going to wake up one random Tuesday, call a press conference, and announce that he is officially siding with his daughter-in-law over his own wife. That is literally not how any of this functions on a constitutional or practical level. The British monarchy does not operate through dramatic reality TV-style confrontations. It operates through painfully gradual shifts, quiet schedule adjustments, and the slow, inevitable passage of time. William and Kate will eventually be the king and queen. Camilla will eventually transition into the role of the Dowager Queen, or whatever specific title she chooses to take. Absolutely everyone involved in this situation knows this timeline. The tension and the drama are entirely, 100% manufactured for consumption. So where does that actually leave us? It leaves us with a storyline that is undeniably compelling to read over a cup of coffee, but one that completely falls apart into dust the exact moment you apply basic logic or look at the actual documented timeline of events. Camilla has been operating in the brutal public eye for decades. Kate has been wildly popular for over 10 years. Charles has been relentlessly consistent in his unwavering support of his wife. Literally none of this is new. None of this is a sudden development. And absolutely none of it suggests some brewing, explosive confrontation that is about to fundamentally reshape the monarchy. What it actually suggests is that royal coverage still heavily relies on the exact same tired tropes it has been using since the mid-1990s, and that the lingering ghost of Princess Diana is still the absolute most reliable source of financial engagement that royal reporters possess. Honestly, the fact that this exact same story just keeps getting endlessly recycled in slightly different forms is maybe the most genuinely interesting thing about it. Every 6 to 8 months, like clockwork, there is a brand new, exclusive version of Camilla is jealous of Kate, and every single time it is presented as if it is shocking, breaking news, rather than a recurring, fictional narrative that never actually leads to any real-world consequences. The minor details change slightly to fit the season. Sometimes the alleged feud is about who gets to wear which tiara to a state banquet. Sometimes it's about Charles paying too much attention to his grandchildren. Sometimes it's heavily tied to Diana's lingering legacy, but the core architecture of the story is always exactly the same. And the simple fact that this story keeps being aggressively told, despite never once being confirmed by credible actions or leading to any actual public conflict, tells you vastly more about the people writing it and the people clicking on it than it does about the women it's supposedly about. If you want my actual unfiltered read on the situation based on how these households actually function, I think Camilla and Kate have a perfectly functional, highly professional working relationship that is probably much warmer today than it was 10 years ago, but they are not especially close confidants. And that is completely normal for two in-laws who are essentially forced to co-manage a family business under intense pressure. I think King Charles is hyper-focused on stabilizing his relatively short reign, managing his ongoing health treatments, and isn't spending a fraction of his time indulging in emotional what-ifs about the 1980s. I think Kate is showing up, doing her job impeccably well, focusing on her own children, and isn't trying to actively compete with a 77-year-old woman. And I think the global media will continue to write this exact same story for as long as people keep clicking on it, which realistically will probably be forever. Because human beings fundamentally love a good love triangle, even when that triangle exists entirely within our collective imagination. But what do I know? I'm just looking at the exact same public information, schedules, and historical data that everyone else has access to, and trying to figure out what actually makes logical sense. And what makes sense to me is that a 75-year-old king, his 77-year-old wife, and his 42-year-old daughter-in-law are absolutely not engaged in a silent, petty jealousy war that requires a dramatic royal intervention. What makes sense is that they are all just doing their assigned jobs, navigating a profoundly complicated family history and getting on with the business of state, while the rest of the world projects elaborate, fictional narratives onto their micro-expressions at public events. The British monarchy has survived actual global wars, constitutional crises, and legitimate catastrophic scandals. It is more than likely going to survive the fact that Kate Middleton happens to be more popular than Queen Camilla. And yet, despite knowing all of this, I completely understand why the story persists and thrives. It's not really about Camilla, or Kate, or Charles at all. It is entirely about us, the audience, and our deep psychological need for narrative coherence in a family that has provided us with decades of genuine, messy drama. We all watched Charles and Diana's marriage spectacularly implode in real time. We watched Camilla slowly transform from the most hated woman in Britain into the crowned queen consort. We watched William marry a commoner who turned out to be vastly better at the job of being royal than almost anyone ever expected. That is an actual multi-generational epic spanning decades, filled with heroes, villains, redemption arcs, and deeply tragic deaths. The real story is already dramatic enough, but it is also highly complicated, morally ambiguous, and it rarely offers clean, satisfying emotional resolutions. So, the tabloids happily simplify it for us. They give us the digestible version where the complex human beings are reduced to basic archetypes, where the conflicts are straightforward, and where the emotional beats land exactly where we feel they should. That is exactly why the Camilla versus Kate narrative works so incredibly well. It takes two women who physically represent entirely different eras of the monarchy, the controversial second wife who waited decades in the shadows for legitimacy, and the flawless, beloved future queen who makes the impossible job look effortless and deliberately pits them against each other in a way that feels symbolically deeply satisfying. Camilla is forced to represent the past, the scandal, the infidelity, and the messiness of real human relationships. Kate is positioned to represent the bright future, the stability, and the idealized, pristine version of what royalty is supposed to look like. Of course, the public wants to see them in conflict. And of course, the public desperately wants Kate to win. But that is not journalism, that is mythology. Charles's reign is widely expected by everyone, including Charles himself, to be significantly shorter than his mother's was, simply due to the mathematics of his age and health. William and Kate are the undeniable future of the institution, and absolutely everyone involved knows it, especially Camilla. But the global media machine requires a constant, daily stream of content to fill the vast, empty gaps between major royal weddings, tours, and scandals. Especially now that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are largely isolated in California. The British press has lost their primary source of daily conflict. And unfortunately, two professional women who work together daily and share a cordial, entirely functional but not especially warm relationship does not sell magazines, doesn't generate clicks, it doesn't keep people glued to their screens. We get this recycled narrative instead. We get the trope of the jealous aging older woman desperately clinging to power. We get the effortlessly beloved flawless younger woman. We get the weak conflicted man caught in the middle of them. And we get the tragic lingering ghost of the first wife haunting everyone's every move. It is a deeply compelling story structure. It has heroes, villains, and high stakes. It just also happens to be entirely untrue. The Diana regret angle is arguably the most emotionally manipulative part of all of this because it directly taps into something that millions of people around the world still deeply, viscerally feel, the idea that Diana was profoundly wronged, that she deserved a much better ending, and that Charles simply must, on some cosmic level, secretly know he made a catastrophic mistake. And on a human level, maybe Charles does have some quiet regrets about how terribly certain things played out in the 90s. Most divorced people do. Charles's reign is widely expected by everyone, including Charles himself, to be significantly shorter than his mother's was, simply due to the mathematics of his age and health. William and Kate are the undeniable future of the institution, and absolutely everyone involved knows it, especially Camilla. But the global media machine requires a constant, daily stream of content to fill the vast, empty gaps between major royal weddings, tours, and scandals. Especially now that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are largely isolated in California. The British press has lost their primary source of daily conflict. And unfortunately, two professional women who work together daily and share a cordial, entirely functional but not especially warm relationship does not sell magazines, doesn't generate clicks, it doesn't keep people glued to their screens. We get this recycled narrative instead. We get the trope of the jealous aging older woman desperately clinging to power. We get the effortlessly beloved flawless younger woman. We get the weak conflicted man caught in the middle of them. And we get the tragic lingering ghost of the first wife haunting everyone's every move. It is a deeply compelling story structure. It has heroes, villains, and high stakes. It just also happens to be entirely untrue. The Diana regret angle is arguably the most emotionally manipulative part of all of this because it directly taps into something that millions of people around the world still deeply, viscerally feel, the idea that Diana was profoundly wronged, that she deserved a much better ending, and that Charles simply must, on some cosmic level, secretly know he made a catastrophic mistake. And on a human level, maybe Charles does have some quiet regrets about how terribly certain things played out in the 90s. Most divorced people do.